Hello, everybody, and another Room Rumble coming out to you. This one was when I dropped into, it's called the Synagogue. It's basically CJ Cox. He's been in a few debates. I've seen him. Seems relatively good to engage with, good to discuss with, kind of thing. And so the Synagogue is his room, and I jumped in there to sort of just have a conversation because it was about morality, and I think that the topic of the room was sort of how atheists don't have sort of any access to morality or something along those lines. I may be misrepresenting that a little. Um, it was interesting. It was a good conversation with him, and I do have another video with CJ Cox in it where we sit down for a one-on-one. I'll probably put that under the proofread instead of a room rumble because it was just a one-on-one. It wasn't sort of me against the world. It was just him and I having a conversation, which was really good. And I really want to put that up very soon. So I best put this up. He mentions in that engagement that I came into his room and discussed morality, and it's a continuation of that. But it was really interesting because there was Nick there who he's been very aggressive in the past, but he was actually great in this video. I want to give him full credit for being a really engaging person. He has his point of view. I sort of stringently disagree with it, but he definitely held himself with a good amount of decorum. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for sort of Kevin's biblical worldview kind of thing. I can't even remember what Kevin's name is. Kevin's somebody I've run into in Praise's room in the past. He kind of lurks in there occasionally and sort of can be incredibly mean, can be incredibly childish and juvenile. And he sort of he likes to take the presup road. He'll go down the presup thing of how do you know anything? How do you found your ground your foundation of left, right, and center? And it's kind of this well, if I can't win you have a moral engagement about morals and how we know what we ought to do and what we ought not to do and things like that. There's a certain type of person when they come down to feeling panicked about that, they will go to how do you know anything? How do you know that you have anything at all, or you're sort of, where's your foundation for anything? I have God, what's yours? Which is kind of interesting. I've got certain ways that I address this. I've discussed them before. Essentially, you're getting down to and sort of going into this thing called hard solipsism. How do we know literally anything? And it is it's a rabbit hole. It's absolutely a rabbit hole. When you start to get down to how you secure and ground anything, and part of science is based upon this. You get into a lot of philosophy of science, and a man called Popper who sort of said there's a fallibility with knowledge. You've got to sort of acknowledge that you can't ground these things and take a pragmatic approach. So I'm a big fan of Popper. I think he's absolutely right. I think that fallibility and falsifiability, that we may not be able to ground our knowledge of things, but we can certainly eliminate them, is fantastic. His work is amazing. There is that we basically eliminate what we know not to be true rather than trying to ground what we think may be true. So, but Kevin's obviously very overbearing. He's very sort of ill-equipped to handle the discussion, but does want to sort of go, well, you can't know anything, no, which is just a hilarious position to take, as a foundation for stuff. And a lot of it is asking questions without expecting to be asked questions back, which I've noticed a lot of pre-subs do. They just want to grill you, but don't actually want a discussion, which is why talking to CJ Cox is such a pleasant change, because you have a back and forth, and he seems honest, he seems genuine. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate someone who is genuinely, they believe completely different than me. I appreciate that they're being genuine in their beliefs and sort of thing. I think the first thing that we get into is sort of why I'm suppressing truth in my unrighteousness kind of thing, which is just, it's this really insulting sort of way of saying, hey, you actually do believe in God, you just don't know it. And it sort of, to an atheist, especially one that's not been in those religious circles their entire life, it just seems like gaslighting to me. Which I wouldn't say that that's what they're trying to do, but that's the first thing that sort of it comes out as, hey, I'm going to tell you what you think, and if you disagree, that just shows that you're lying to yourself about thinking that. It's very, very. I think it is one of the reasons why people turn from religion, because when you start to have doubts and you don't believe anymore, and you're on the fence kind of thing, people will go, "Oh no, you're just suppressing the truth." It's really insulting. Like, it is really insulting to have somebody genuinely looking, and I can only imagine what people going out of religion and deconstructing are going through, to sort of say, "Hey, are these claims of God justified? Do I actually believe this deep down? Is this something that I know to be true?" And for someone to come along and go, "Oh, well, you know it. You're just, being difficult about it." It's really insulting, and I think it cheapens the idea of our self-reflection and our evaluation of what we believe and what we know and what we think we know, that you know and what we know that we know and what we don't know that we know. It's such a weird idea. So I think that knowledge is a subset of belief. I think that belief is to sort of um, belief is sort of a knowledge state that something is true rather than not. I think that knowledge is justified true belief, that it is belief that has been justified by some level of evidence or arguments or something, that has justified it to be more of a certainty for you. And I think there's different stages of knowledge. I think there is sort of you're very, very confident in some things. Other things you would claim knowledge, but you're not so confident. So I think there is a variety of different levels of knowledge there, from quite certain to overwhelmingly confident, like, the sun will run tomorrow. I know the sun will rise tomorrow. um you know is you're utterly confident on it. Whereas you sort of say, well, I know that someone's going to show up for my squash game or something, right? Like, it is a quite a good certainty, but it's probably not as overwhelmingly confident. There's certainly things that could happen where they're not going to. So yeah, so this is the the good conversation with Nick, surprisingly, Nick and CJ, and the absolute dumpster fire that is Kevin's biblical studies, which I must admit I did sort of, I think I conducted myself pretty well. It's a shame he generally didn't, but I hope that I did. And the fact that CJ wanted to talk to me one on one again was a good sign that sort of he enjoyed the conversation as well. So yeah, hopefully I can talk more with CJ. I think it's very productive. I think it's very neither of us are probably going to change each other's minds, but it certainly is interesting to me and interesting to see what he thinks. And I've met a few Calvinists, and they do seem to think different things. So I will upload that as soon as possible. But thank you so much, everybody, and of course, let's get ready to rumble.
And if no one wants to respond to that, I guess we can welcome Mark. And it's been a
Hello.
long time since I've had a discussion with you, Mark.
Yeah. It's been a minute, hasn't it? Yeah, I do apologize. I've been pretty busy. I've been doing debates. I've been doing all kinds of things recently. So yeah, it's been a wild ride. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me on. I really wanted to ask Kevin, actually. So you sort of said that God wants everybody to believe, kind of thing, or everybody to be saved, kind of thing. And it raised a question within my mind that I had, which is sort of, if God wants everybody to be saved, then why isn't everybody saved or everybody believe in a God?
Okay. So the Bible says that God desires that all should or come to repentance, and that He doesn't desire the death of the wicked. He doesn't want anyone to perish. But we don't live in a robot toy world. God gives us a choice to either accept His free offer or reject it, because God wants a world where love is possible, and love is not possible in a robot world. So God would rather have people that chose to submit and love Him rather than it being forced or programmed. And so He does not desire the death of the wicked, but He's not going to force all to believe. If I hope that makes sense. It's like, imagine you have a child and you had the option when the baby was born. We somehow had the technology where the doctor could go inside its head and can completely rewire its brain so that it will only always obey every single word you say without a doubt, and it would never disappoint you at all. Or the doctor can leave the baby in the way it was, and that it can choose to love you as its parent. Would you rather prefer that the baby chose to love you of its own accord, or would you rather have it be a programmed robot?
Well, that's a false analogy, because I'm not talking about God coming down and rewiring any brains or anything like that. What I'm talking about is how we convince each other of things that are the truth, or convince each other to believe things. I don't have to rewire your brain, Kevin, in order to convince you that, say, I'm real, or, I have a ball here kind of thing. I can show you the ball. That's the thing. Like, I'm not rewiring your brain. But God sort of wants everyone to believe, but hasn't provided sufficient evidence, in my mind at least, that He actually exists. So the question
Well,
becomes, well, let me finish. The question becomes, why is it that God wants something, but is incapable of carrying out the actions to allow somebody to believe in it? So doesn't that mean that God has failed to convince people that He exists?
no, God can't fail. The thing is, here's the
Oh,
thing, right? You suppress the truth and unrighteousness because you love your sin. According to the Bible, Romans 1 says that God has made Himself obvious to everybody. So there's no one is without an excuse. So there was a point in time, and I know you might deny this, but I'm going to take the word of God over you, no offense. But let God be true and every man a liar. You, there was some point in your life you knew, actually, how dare I say, you still know deep down, right, that there has to be a creator. This world
I
doesn't make
do.
sense. There is no reasoning without a creator. Logic can't exist without a creator. Everything is dependent upon God. God is the ultimate source. Everything must come from something. So it's God, right? And there was a point in your time where you acknowledged this, but you have chosen to suppress it and reject it. Okay.
Yeah, so
Now
Kevin, no,
sit here. You can sit
I'm
here and
really
tell me
sorry,
like
mate.
I don't believe in a God. But here's the thing: if you say, well, there is no God, well, how can you
Yeah.
trust your own reasoning? Because if your thoughts and reasonings are just chemical processes, how can you trust that?
Well, what else am I supposed to? What else do I have? I mean, I can't just go, well, because you always start with your own thoughts. Okay, so let me address what you've said, because it's a little insulting to be sort of told, hey, this is what you know, right? So the reason why is because you have no access to what I know, and I don't have access to what you know. My thoughts are my own, and I am the communicator of my thoughts, not you're not, and certainly not some book written by sort of Iron Age peoples of the Middle East years ago. No, I will tell you what I think and what I know. They're not the other way around, Kevin. This is the thing. It is to think that you know what people think or what people know, to think that you know better than they do. That's sort of called mind reading. It actually is emblematic of sort of, a problem with your cognitive process, that you think you know better than they do. It may be the case, but you can't demonstrate that in any way, and I can demonstrate I know my thoughts better than you do. The whole idea that um, I suppress truth and unrighteousness. I don't even know what that means. I mean, I live my life trying to help people the best I can and do the best I can. You're just claiming that. I don't know what even that means. Um, I don't believe, I don't know a God exists. I actually believe that no gods exist. If you want to sort of believe incorrectly what I know and what I don't know, well, that's on you. You can delude yourself all you want, but that is not the truth. And I think I have a lot better access to my knowledge than you do. Just as I wouldn't say to you, hey, I know you don't believe in God, you're just making it up. That would be insulting. It would be really insulting, because while I disagree with you on the ontological truth, I don't presume, and it's funny you were talking about humility earlier, I don't presume that I know your mind better than you do. Because at the end of the day, we all have to start with our own thoughts, our own senses. There is nothing else we have access to. You don't have a direct line to a God. You've got to read the Bible. You've got to interpret your own thoughts. So I think this idea that you're starting with God is ridiculous, because you can't start with God unless you are God. You must start with your own cognitive process, because that's all you have access to. And you if you want to say, hey, that cognitive process comes from a God, well, fine, but you've got to demonstrate that's the case, because I don't think it does start with a God.
Well, I may say one thing. God has poured out his spirit into the world in the form of the gospel. So there's a spiritual reality there. So then I think for you to say that we don't have the direct access to him, then you have like a debate on your hands, maybe to like somehow disprove the Holy Spirit, or
Well, I mean, you've got access to the gospel, sure. Is the gospel God?
Well, Mark, here's the thing. You're claiming that I know your thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm not claiming I know your thoughts. My claim is that the Bible says that all men know that God exists and they're without an excuse.
Yeah.
So it's not my thoughts. It's not. That's what God has said, and I stand on the authority of what He has said.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's great, and you can sort of say that, but what it does is it diminishes your credibility in my eyes and everybody that knows that that's wrong, and it diminishes the credibility. Well, Kevin, let me finish. Let me finish. No. Let me finish.
No.
It basically diminishes the credibility of the Bible, because then I know the Bible is wrong, because I don't believe in a God, and I don't know that the Bible is. No, I know that I do not know that there is a God, because knowledge is a subset of belief, and I don't believe in a God. I don't know there's a God. That is completely incorrect.
Mark.
Yeah.
Listen, imagine what you just said. Like, according to the science textbooks,
yeah,
that we have the geologic column, this age is this age, and this age.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're telling me that this is how it is, and I say, well, now I know for a fact all your science textbooks are flawed because those ages are the wrong numbers. Like, you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater here.
Yeah, but no science textbook claims
I don't think laughing at the unbelievers is going to help.
Yeah,
Shut
well,
up,
no. I get the analogy he's trying to make,
Kevin's
but it's
doing a good job of making the case by
I get
laughing. That shows he has a good
I
argument.
get the analogy he's trying to make. It's a false analogy, because what the science textbooks aren't saying is that everybody knows that the scientific column is this, and this, right? That's not what they're doing. They're not pretending. No. They're not pretending that the truth of the matter of what people think. No textbook is doing mind reading. What they're saying is that, and it's not even the textbook that we believe. This is the thing that you're making the error of. It's not because the book says it.
Of course it is. What are you talking about?
It's because the process of science provides more reliable results. Mark. Yes, it is. The textbook is just there to convey. The textbook is just there to convey how they found the information. It isn't the process itself. You're mixing up the place for the map. So the reason why the textbook is representative is because the process they have used is the scientific process, which is responsible for just about every single major discovery ever made throughout the course of human history.
All right, that's great. What they have is, in the book, you have the interpretation of the scientist on those rocks, right? So in the books, they're saying this layer is such and such age. This layer is such and such age. They could be wrong about the age of those layers. The thing is, because these are put in textbooks and given out at universities for students to study, people are being taught that this granite, this layer here is this age because it's in the science textbook. If it was not in the textbook, people would not hold to those dates for the ages of those rocks.
Are you
Okay,
talking about
so
sort of college level, or are you talking about university level? Are you talking about like sort of
all
educating
of them,
geologists? Well, no,
because
because
I remember
once
when
you
I was
go
in high
into
school.
university geology, what they do is they say, this is how we know that the rocks are of a certain age. And they always give margins of error, and the students are expected to question and push back against that. How do we know that they're that age? And the textbooks give the process used. We use this process in order to find it out. And that's the difference. Like the book doesn't just claim that all the geological columns fit into these ages. It explains how we know that they fit into these ages. And so when you have a claim like, I can tell what other people know and what other people understand to be the truth about things, the Bible doesn't explain how that is the case and how you can check it for yourself. All it does is make that assertion. And so it lacks
All right, Mark, check this out.
credibility.
I got something real simple for you, Mark. If you walk outside right now, right, look at your neighbor's house across the street, right? Just do it. A quick experiment. Sure. Is it logical to look at that house and assume this house came from nothing or it made itself?
I'd say what that's got to do with anything. I don't understand what's this analogy to?
No,
the geologic column didn't make itself.
Just follow along with me, Mark.
Because I want to add something here real quick.
Are you talking about the origin of the universe?
So let me try to clarify things a little bit here, because I think there's a little bit of missing information. So the Bible does give an example, actually gives two examples for what exactly it means by innate knowledge of God. And to be clear, it's not innate knowledge of Jesus specifically. It's innate knowledge of a creator generally. And this is something you'll find most clearly in Romans 1 and 2. The examples given are what we would today essentially refer to as argument from design and moral argument. The idea basically being that God has declared his glory, has declared his handiwork through the heavens, and that God has declared he's in some sense, not in the full regenerative sense, but in some sense has written his law on hearts of men. And the reason I think that's important, number one, is because it's just points out that there is actually a mechanism that it explains. But number two, I think it more properly makes clear what exactly scripture is saying, right? Because you had brought up, well, I think it's somewhat insulting to say, I know that you know when you don't have access to my thoughts, right?
Correct. Yeah.
But I think that you would be hard pressed to find, I'll word it that way, you would be hard pressed to find even the most stringently atheist biologists and philosophers who do not at least agree with the idea that there seems to be an intuitive truth to things like objective morality and arguments from design. Now, they will reject those arguments, and they'll make arguments, of course, that speak of whether or not we can trust intuition or stuff like that. And we can go there if we like, but nevertheless, the majority of people, I think, will at least concede, like, for example, Richard Dawkins, this is from a biologist perspective, not a philosopher's perspective, but I digress. Richard Dawkins would say the reason that everything appears to be designed is because the process of evolution fits the holes perfectly. And he compares it to like when rain fills up a pothole, right? The puddle appears to be perfectly designed for the pothole because it has filled up the pothole to the point where it gets to the street and then it starts to overflow. Everything outside of the depth of the pothole then goes elsewhere. So it looks as if the pothole is specifically designed to contain the water, but really that's actually the water adapting to the pothole. And he would argue that evolution is working in a similar way, right? Now, obviously, I don't agree with that, but the point there is there is a concession that there is a kind of human intuition where we all feel as if the world is specially designed in some capacity, and we all feel as if the moral oughts and ought nots that you throw around all the time actually mean something, and that they're not just the machinations of human cultures and of human minds. And interestingly enough, we tend to even have the same, at least in a general sense, moral laws. We don't tend to agree on the details of moral laws, but like you'll never find a culture that believes murder is wrong. You'll only find, or murder is not wrong, excuse me. You'll only find cultures which define murder differently than you do, right? So like, for example, in Nazi Germany, murder was still absolutely against the law. It's just that the government did not consider the killing of Jews to be murder. That was state sanctioned, right? But they still there's still something within them that affirms murder is wrong. They've just defined it differently. And again, this is not to get into some sort of like subjectivism or anything like that, but the point is just to say, not only do we all have this kind of initial intuition that morality must be in some sense real, though people, of course, will reject that. The further down you get the can't even talk, excuse me. The further you get down the philosophical rabbit hole, there's certainly plenty of people who object to objective morality. But not only that element, we also tend to agree on which things are wrong: murder, rape, stealing, so on and so forth. We just don't tend to agree on the definitions of those things, which I think is a detail that is important to consider, right? The details being notwithstanding, we all have the same general laws. So I hope that clarifies at least a little bit why it's not just like a mere, well, haha, you're dumb, and I know better than you do. The other thing I just want to point out very briefly.
Well, you brought up a lot of points there, like a lot of them. I would like to try and get to them at some point.
Yeah, no, certainly. Just one last thing, which is just simply to say, while I understand that you are not a believer, and so therefore you are not accepting the premise that the Bible is inspired scripture, there is essentially two options. It either is or it is not, right? At least as far as that question is concerned. And if in fact it is, then it must be noted that it's not just a bunch of, Iron Age peasant sheep farmers doing the best they can with the society that they're given. So just to say, anyways, I hope you get that particular point.
Okay, so sort of, and so I'm saying no, something I think it is, and acknowledging that I don't believe something, because knowledge is a subset of belief. It is justified true belief. If I don't believe it, then I can't know it by sort of definition of philosophy, how it considers to be knowledge. So that sort of proves Kevin's point that I know it somehow completely wrong, because I have to believe it before I can claim to know it or do indeed know it. And you mentioned that it's hard to find a biologist or philosopher that doesn't sort of say that morality is objective, but you've acknowledged that there is a discussion among atheists, and sort of even I don't believe in objective morality, so that's not necessarily true. And I know there are a great many atheists that don't believe in objective morality, so that's not true either. And so,
if I may clarify,
I'd like to address all your points, because you're kind of, sort of interrupting me now, sort of gish galloping. You've thrown out so many points, and I don't get to address all of them. So I'd like to address all of your points before moving onwards, because I will leave them behind otherwise, and I don't want to leave points on the table unaddressed. Moral intuition is not necessarily an accurate way to tell if something is right or wrong. There's certainly things that we think, hey, we should do this, and then change our minds. So, sort of taking moral intuition as reliable is not reliable. And you've sort of said it's been written on our heart. And apart from some sort of hyperbole, and you've sort of said, well, that's how we've gotten morality. That's the how, like I would say, how of a textbook. But it doesn't, because my heart... and apart from a metaphor, it doesn't explain anything, because my heart doesn't make any moral decisions. It's been a long time since we think that a heart did anything but pump blood around the body.
Mark, can I don't want you to. I want to.
No, I want to finish. I want to finish all of these points, because there were so many.
But you're wrong about the heart. You're out of date.
I don't. Like, you can address it after I'm finished. With Dawkins and the process of evolution, it was actually.
Well, there's going to be a lot of points to address after you're finished.
Yeah, that's my point. That's my point.
If you keep interrupting,
that
If you keep
CJ went
interrupting him,
on
Nick, he'll never get anywhere.
with so many points, and I have responses to all of them. This is what Gish Gallop is. It is to throw out so many points that I can't address them all. We move on to other things, and then, you sort of go, well, they never addressed my points. I'm trying to address them.
Yeah, I guess because it's not a debate, it's a discussion, I guess,
Well,
yeah.
that still doesn't mean you get to throw out 10 million points and then somebody can't answer them.
Well, I think he was trying to give a whole concept of an overall sort of view.
Then why can't I get
So
over
it's
it?
just a different thing.
Hang on for a moment. It's getting a little out of hand. To be clear, and I do want to give Mark proper time to make the point here. He is obviously the only non-believer in the room. But to be clear, I really only made 2 points, which is that there at least appears to be an intuition of creation, and there at least appears to be an intuition of morality having objective meaning. Now, I did not claim that those things are accepted to be universal, right? So, for example, with the Dawkins thing, the reason I bring him up is because he acknowledges the intuition is there. He does not acknowledge a creator. He doesn't, in other words, he thinks the intuition is wrong, right? Same thing with objective morality.
Let's focus on intuition then. Is intuition a reliable way to determine what is true and what is not true? And it is not. Like, intuition would say that if you see a shadow move in a dark alley, you immediately prepare that something dangerous is there. Intuition allows us to make very, very quick decisions, very, very fast decisions, without having to, in our higher consciousness, overview it and make decisions about it. But it is not necessarily the most accurate way, but it is the fastest. Intuition would tell us that the earth is flat, because that's what we see when we look around us. That's what intuition would say. But that is not true. It's not a reliable way. A much more reliable way is a rational mind to analyze it. So things are counterintuitive. Things that are real are counterintuitive. So just saying, well, it is intuitive to think that this would occur is not a good way to evaluate whether something is true or not. Intuitive moral laws that people are talking about, usually what they're referring to is empathy and reciprocity, which are the two mechanisms as a social species that we have to deal with one another. And the reason why, and I can point to, hey, you say murder is wrong in all cultures, but we have the Aztecs sacrificing people constantly, and you may say, oh well, that's not murder because it's not against the law. But that's the whole point. The whole point is that if you just had humans wholesale killing each other all the time, then it wouldn't be a social species. We have evolved to not do that to one another because that's how we've been successful. Humans individually are incredibly weak. We can't survive on our own. If you put one human by themselves in the African savannah, it is highly unlikely they'll be able to survive on their own. When they go to sleep, they're probably going to be eaten by something. But together we can actually do things that may allow us to survive. So we have to be a cooperative species. The whole idea that this idea of working together and being a cooperative species comes from God means that God would have to write morality on the hearts of any social species, like meerkats or monkeys and things like that. And I'm not sure why you're sort of claiming that animals have some sort of morality, if that is the case of what you're claiming. So I don't think intuitions are particularly accurate in getting to the truth. So many counterintuitive things exist, and the diversity of moral thought is directly antithetical to the idea that God has somehow imprinted on us some sort of moral behavior. It is much better explained through the cooperative nature of social species than it is from a deity that you can't seem to produce.
So, and to make sure I understand the first objection would be the unreliability of intuition, and the second would be the moral diversity amongst humans, right? How it doesn't seem like we all fit a set moral pattern. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and I guess with the appearance of design, it has the appearance of design, as a lot of things do, but it's not designed. And I have a question about design for you. how are you? What is undesigned in your worldview?
All right, so I'll have that as the third point here. So to get to the third point
Yeah.
first, just because it's the simplest,
Sure.
in a manner of speaking, of course, nothing, because I believe in a deity. So by default, everything is at least in some capacity designed.
So what are you
on my worldview.
contrasting it against?
So the main thing you would be contrasting it against, I guess, would be, or it's not even necessarily contrasting per se, as much as it is you look at that which is artificial and you can see the telltale signs of an artificial mechanism. And then if you see some of those same signs in a natural mechanism, it seems to imply that that mechanism is also designed, because we know an artificial mechanism by default is designed. So it wouldn't be so much a compare and contrast per se, as much as it would be just the compare. I know that what a motor is, and it has certain signs that tell me, even if I know nothing about motors, that this is the creation of a human being, right? Or of some being. And then if I can look at, say, a star or a cell or a mitochondria or what have you, and I see the same signs, that seems to be at least a evidence that there is a possibility of design in those things. Now, with that being said, the intuition argument to me is interesting, because it's both true and not, right? Like, intuition is mostly reliable, but of course it's not always reliable, and there is a point there. The intuition, for example, that well, what would be just a good intuition off the top of my head, I guess. Well, I guess it's intuitive that the sun will come up tomorrow morning. I don't know. I mean, you do have a lot of evidence of that, considering the fact that it's happened every day of your life, right? But nevertheless,
It's more
I can't think
inductive
of
than intuitive.
exactly. So I guess I can't think of a particularly good example off the top of my head, so I apologize for that. But nevertheless, here is a good example of one that's even kind of incorrect. So, are you familiar with the miasma theory of disease?
Yes.
Yeah, and so for those who aren't, basically means bad air. People thought that bad air got you sick, right? Which is not correct. It's not true. But it's also kind of true, and it saved an awful lot of lives. And what I mean by that is, when people would go to a swamp or to a place with a lot of dead bodies or a lot of feces or something else that smelled really bad, they got sick, right? And their fear, their intuitive fear of bad smells, of bad air, actually was kind of right, in the sense that what they're smelling is decay, typically, not always, but typically they're smelling decay or something that might be noxious, like sulfur, right? And it does kill people, and staying away from that does, in fact, keep people alive, right? Now, this is an example where an intuition even turns out to be kind of incorrect. And yet it also is kind of correct. And like I said, it even saves a good deal of lives. It doesn't save all of them. There's certainly certain situations. The cholera outbreaks of the 1740s in Britain were a clear example of the pitfalls of miasma theory, because you poop in the water. The water is obviously, it appears to dilute everything, and so you think you're not going to get sick if you believe miasma, and then of course you do. So it has its pitfalls, no doubt, right? But we can see there how the intuition actually had a legitimate function, and it's a function that arguably has saved millions and millions of people. And then, and there are other intuitions, some of which they're just not coming to my mind at the moment, which are even entirely correct, right? Now, are they always correct? Of course not. Counterintuitives do exist. But as a general rule, intuitive things are, if not 100% true, at least very useful and beneficial, right? Like in the case of that miasma thing. So when we go back to this question of, are these things intuitive? Really, what we should be asking at that point is not so much, does that mean it's correct? Because I don't think it necessarily means it's correct. But we know that intuition is used for something. It keeps the species alive. It tends to be correct, even though it's not always, or at least partially correct, even when it's not. So the question that becomes, why do we have this intuition? Why do we have this intuition that things appear to be designed? And why do we have an intuition that our moral decisions, the oughts and ought nots, actually mean something concrete? Now, you would say that has to do with the fact that we're a social species, and so this would be where I get to the second point. I would argue first and foremost. Well, actually, you know what? I don't want to put too much on your plate here, so I want to kind of choose where exactly I'm going with this carefully, because there's also the point I want to address as far as the moral diversity, and I think I'll probably have to get to that one first, just because it'll be quicker. Moral diversity, in my opinion, is very easily explainable if there is indeed a God who imprints his own morality on us, in so much as that you'll never find moral diversity that is so diverse that people disagree on concepts, at least the general concepts. They disagree on details, but they don't tend to disagree on concepts. So you brought up the Aztecs. Well, murder in Aztec society is wrong as they define it. What their difference from us is that they have a different definition of what murder is. Now, is their definition right? Is it equally valid? That's not what I'm saying, and I don't think so.
Too
But
hard for
nevertheless,
Calvinists to follow, though.
say again.
Do not murder. That's too hard for a Calvinist to follow.
I don't really know what that comment's supposed to mean.
That truly is a ridiculous remark.
That's replacement theology. You threw the law away. Just carry on. I just had to say that.
Well, anyways,
I don't
want to get
that. I don't get why Calvinists.
I'm here for you, Mark. Don't believe these guys. They'll turn you twice more over to the devil than themselves.
Okay.
Stick with where you're at.
Well, apparently, yeah.
Well, then you might as well apply that to CJ as well, Mike.
At any rate, I don't want to get off on that. The point is to say that the concepts tend to be universal. The concepts of honoring elders, you really just look at the 10 Commandments essentially, and if you break them down to their concentrate of honoring deities, of not honoring other deities in your respective culture, of not profaning the name of whatever your reverent thing tends to be, rest days, not specifically the seventh-day Sabbath, but rest days are a universal concept. You can't work people to death. Honoring elders. Everybody agrees that there's something called unlawful murder. There's something called unlawful taking of somebody's stuff, right? And so on and so forth. Now, we have vast differences as it pertains to the definitions of those things. But to the best of my knowledge, I don't know of any society that outright has rejected those things, at least not in its infancy. Perhaps they get to that point at some time. But even the sociopath thinks it's wrong to murder him. You know what I mean? So there's still even a level of accepting of the concepts there, even if there's not so much of a, like I said, an agreement on the details. So that would lead me back to the question of why. And I want to get to the sympathy thing as well, but I feel like I've said enough.
Okay.
You probably have a couple things you want to respond to.
Yeah, so intuition, the reason why it exists is because we've got to make fast decision making sometimes. Sometimes we don't have the time in order to mull over whether something is, analytically or deductively, inductively right or wrong or what have you. So if a shadow moves, the natural inclination is to act fast, because if you sit there thinking about all of the things that you're seeing, you will not survive. Or that at least has been part of human history, that you need to think fast and act fast. But intuition, I guess what I'm getting across is that you've given that, oh yes, intuition can be correct, and you're absolutely right. There can be a tiger in the bushes, and that's why we've got to act fast. But that's not necessarily the case, and you'll get a much more accurate assessment if you actually sit down and think about whether all of the things that you've heard. Have you heard anything? Do you see any eyes? Is there something else have you seen any tigers in the area? However, that is not useful for thinking fast. And so we've got these two sort of levels of cognitive thinking. There's intuition, which is fast thinking, and then we've got induction, deduction, abduction, the cognitive processes which allows us to mull over things. And I guess that intuition is not a good and reliable way to present evidence of something, because it can be so wrong, and a lot better way to get evidence, which has been definitely shown, is the sort of rational processes, and sort of you've describe that yourself, where sort of intuitionally we say, hey, smell gets you sick, kind of thing, and you say, hey, it can be useful. Yes, but what is a lot more useful is having a rational understanding and applying empirical evidence to what it is that you're thinking about. And your example has shown that beautifully. So I do thank you. Intuition. And sort of so when you're saying murder is wrong, we just have different definitions of what murder is, and I agree with that. It's just that the thing that is universal is empathy and reciprocity. Like the idea that we take care of our elderly is because we can have empathy that we one day will be old. We can understand that, hey, that person, I will one day be in that person's shoes. And reciprocity comes in by saying, okay, well, if I'm going to one day be in that shoes, I should treat them like this because I want to be treated like that. This has been sort of documented in Capuchin monkeys very, very rigorously, that they do have these two senses of empathy and reciprocity. And so when you're talking about, and I'm glad I was going to bring up sociopaths and psychopaths as well, when they do lack that sense of empathy. They have no sense of empathy whatsoever. What you see is that they don't have any compulsion to adhere to the moral standards that you're talking about. They literally, they will only think about themselves because they can't place themselves in anybody else's shoes. Which is, I think that is interesting. But, when you're talking morals, you're really only talking about rational members of society rather than irrational members of society, which would be a psychopath or a sociopath. So I think it's perfectly explainable why we have these standards, and it's just that who the standards applies to varies. Because if you have empathy and you say, hey, well, I'm an upstanding member of this society, I can imagine that if I was an upstanding member and I was killed, I would not like that. And I can project that to say, hey, if I kill somebody else, that would be an awful thing to do. And there's nothing sort of confusing about that from a biological point of view. That's how social species work. And we've documented in everything from sort of the higher corvids like crows and things to capuchin monkeys.
In a sense, and what I mean by that is there is a level of empathy that we can certainly find in. I mean, I'm clearly no expert, but I am very fascinated in wolves, and I can say that based off of the knowledge, the lay knowledge at least that I have on wolves, that certainly is true of them. That there is a level of empathy they have with each other, and it allows them to function as a cohesive unit.
Sure.
And as a result, despite being kind of biological losers in a sense, like they're not athletic the way cats are, they're not strong the way bears are, but they dominate their ecosystem, right? And so what am I saying that for? To grant you, there is a level of truth to that statement. But there's also, I think, a lot of things that are missing even from these social creatures that now, well, hang on, let me pin the thought I just had to the side. Let me finish the thought I'm having. So, for example, it is quite common, even for social creatures, and particularly I'm thinking here of wolves, llamas, and lions, to actually kill the elderly because they bring the pack down, or the pride or the herd, whatever it happens to be, right? They're a liability. And as a result, since they are a liability, it's actually best to get rid of them rather than to keep them around and to protect them. Now, I know virtually nothing about primates, I'll be honest. And so I can't say whether that's true about, with the capuchin monkeys you brought up earlier or with any other sort of, more advanced primates like apes or gibbons or anything like that. Gibbons are apes. So anyways, you get my point. But nevertheless, at least with these creatures, one of which in the case of the wolf is thought by some to be the highest as far as intelligence is concerned, land predator on the planet, besides us, of course. That seems like there's at least something that is different as far as our views compared to theirs. They're also quite fond of things like theft and sexual assault and so on and so forth, right?
No, that's no. Chimpanzees would be one of the predators that
one of the predators that would what?
The highest intelligence land predators, chimpanzees, easily over wolves, easily.
Well, actually, so it's interesting. I don't want to get off on that too much, but you should believe it or not, there is some pretty awesome evidence to suggest that wolves and Canis lupus in general, which I say to include dogs, actually might match in some ways the intelligence of chimps, especially in their ability to learn. They learn at a rate that is significantly faster than chimpanzees do, which is, it's fascinating. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm right about that, but it's a fascinating thing. I think you, of all people, might actually be very interested in that. But I digress. The point there being that, this. So we were speaking specifically there about the caring of elders. It doesn't seem to be particularly common amongst these intelligent and empathetic species. In fact, quite the opposite. They see it as an excuse to get rid of them. And the other thing I want to point out here really quickly, which is not necessarily directly related to that, but it's the second point here, or it's actually the first one you had brought up, but about rationality being a more reliable tool than intuition. I would actually flatly agree with that. But what I would say is intuition does need to be, number one, accounted for, because it is very often a quite useful tool that can definitely be right. But more importantly, intuitions are always grounded in something real, even when they're wrong. So for example, the earth being flat, you brought up earlier. Well, that's grounded in a very real fact, which is that the earth is massive enough that it does actually appear to us to be flat, even though it's not, right? The sheer size of the earth compared to us means that while we're on its surface, we perceive it as a flat surface, even though in reality, if we were able to see from, say, a space view, we could actually see that it's in fact a spheroid surface, right? So in other words, there's an answer to why that intuition exists based in reality. And the other example you gave is the shadow, the shadow's going to kill us kind of thing, right? Well, that's also based in reality. The reality, of course, being that, especially back in primal days, but even in the modern day, well, not so much the modern day, even as anatomically modern humans, I'll word it that way. That's very often true, right? Whether it's guerrilla warfare or an actual tiger in the bushes, that's very often the case. And better safe than sorry is the way our ancestors have tended to deal with that sort of thing. So that's a three-pronged point. And if I could just narrow it down to its concentrate, one, I agree, intuition does have to take a backseat to analytic thinking and rationality. Number two, intuition nevertheless is useful and is very often right. And number three, intuitions definitely are grounded in something that is real. And I don't know of a single exception to that, even when they are ultimately flatly wrong, such as the idea that the earth is flat or the potential for a tiger to be in the bushes.
Yeah, I agree with you. They're grounded in something real. I'd address that point first, sure. And that real thing may be the sort of social understanding that animals have and the empathy and reciprocity. But what I'm getting at is there's no reason to sort of intuitively go, well, it's been given by some sort of God and go to there. That intuitive thing may not be right at all. And you've sort of said that. It's very often the case that there's a tiger in the bushes. Well, I don't think so. I think that just the consequences of not jumping when there's the bushes rustle has bred into us, evolved into us, that we've adapted to jumping when the bushes rustle, because the ones that didn't, they may not have been correct the majority of the time, but the ones that always jumped are the ones that survived. And that's sort of why I'm explaining to you the process of evolution, that the organisms or the offshoots of humans that did not work together as well as humans just did not survive. Now, I've looked up sort of cases of, it's called senicide that you're talking about, killing the elderly. Scandinavia had practices where in their history where people either threw themselves or threw other people threw them over cliffs. In the Roman Empire, there was a practice of sacrificing anybody above the age of 70 to Kronos, the god of time. There was certain, and it wasn't widespread. I want to make this clear. It certainly wasn't widespread. That these things were very, very localized, very, sort of in certain families or certain like sort of cultural things, but they have occurred in humans, and they wouldn't call that murder, just as we wouldn't call a lion killing their elderly murder. They would just say, hey, they have the same understanding, just they have different names for it, different definition for it. Just as those societies wouldn't call it murder, they would just have different definition of what is murder. So none of this actually sort of refutes my point, because humans have engaged in the same. I mean, the Inuits leave people upon icebergs, and we know that happened a lot throughout Inuit societies, that anybody too elderly to not be able to contribute to the tribe were left on the iceberg to die. Wolves, so as far as I know, and I could be wrong, but as far as I know, wolves haven't even passed the self-awareness test, where they put a mirror up and they put a mark on the animal's head. And basically, what happens with the organisms with a much higher intelligence, and we're talking things like chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and things like elephants and things, they will, instead of touching the image for the mark, they will touch their own head. They will understand that what they are seeing is themselves. And that's sort of one of the ways that we can sort of categorize the higher intelligence things. And not to say that wolves aren't incredibly intelligent, that they are. And it leads me to the point where they display behaviors that allow them to socially cooperate, just like humans have behaviors that allow them to socially cooperate. So yes, wolves are not the strongest, they're not the most powerful in their environment. They are the apex predator because they work together, because they have these empathy and reciprocity. They have these social conventions that allow them to be incredibly effective as a group. Same is true for humans. Humans have also tool use that propelled us to amazing heights. But the basic line, we have cooperation, and that allows us to outperform any physical sort of limitations that we have. None of this sort of points to an objective morality, or a morality that somehow comes from a god. What it points to is a evolution of these traits to allow us to work together in order to better for everybody. But what comes with that is that there is no idea that all killing is wrong. No, we separate it into, hey, if that person violates the social norms of our species, then it is allowable to murder, if you will, that individual because they violated it. And we've documented that capuchin monkeys, for instance, I love them. They're amazing. They have they make calls when they're out gathering, things like eggs and berries and things like that. So they make this call which tells the others there's a snake around. Some of them lie in order to sneak food away. They'll call a snake and all of them will go up trees, and this one monkey that called the snake will go around grabbing berries and eggs for himself. If he is found out, he will be kicked out of the troop. He will actually be expelled and banished, and almost certainly die. So they have not what I'd call morality, but sort of a pseudo-morality, a proto-morality, a sort of idea that it is wrong to lie about snakes. And I find it fascinating, because in a human we would say, hey, that's moral. I don't think it's morality. It's not codified. It's not something that humans would lay down. So I think the morality is one step further, but it definitely shows this idea that empathy and reciprocity can make up sort of a proto-morality for societies.
Yeah, and again, there's a small extent to where I would even somewhat agree with that, right? And really briefly, I did just want to mention it's not necessarily the point here, but just something which you might find fascinating. Mary Bates, who, at least this website I'm on at the moment, is a claimed PhD student. Now, to be clear, or not PhD student, PhD holder in biology, has said, quote, in an olfactory mirror test of self-recognition, wolves demonstrate they know the difference between self and other.
I haven't looked up olfactory, to be honest with you. I've only looked up visual.
Yeah, and that's mostly the only reason I'm pointing that out is mostly just for fun, because I have
Yeah,
a
yeah,
feeling
sure.
that's the kind of thing you might be fascinated in.
Yeah, that's interesting.
They're quite incredible creatures, honestly. And of course, your dog, if you have one, is a wolf, just significantly modified. But anyways, that aside, so when you bring up the empathy and reciprocity element of this, right? I would simply point out at this stage that while I would disagree with that as being a consistent explanation for morality, it's actually not so much of a refutation of the initial. Because remember how we got here, right? It was this question of, okay, so what does the Bible mean by we suppress the truth and unrighteousness? And it gives those specific examples of moral argument and argument from creation, right?
Right.
And I was pointing out that it seems to be universally agreed upon that at least that intuition exists, even though we don't agree that there's any substance there, right? So me and Christopher Hitchens, if he were around, would agree that we have an intuition towards objective morality. He would just say that intuition's wrong, and I would argue it's right. And then from that stage, we would each go about our given reasons for why that is, which at the moment, that's what you're doing, right? Is, well, I believe it's an empathy reciprocity thing. Higher evolved creatures have more cohesive units in societies, for lack of a better term, as a result of this. Therefore, birth of morality, right?
Yeah, and I would argue that the intuition isn't particularly useful in finding out what is true. So just because intuitively we see something doesn't mean that is actually the case. In fact, from things like the flat Earth, as I pointed out, we kind of have more of a chance of being wrong if we just rely on our intuition.
And while that's good and fair, I'd just like to note, oh my goodness, can't even talk. Note for point of order, come on, Jay, really? Note for point of order, that in this particular case, I don't know if you would be willing to say it or not. Maybe you don't even, maybe I'm not, off base. But it seems as if in this particular case, you've actually conceded that the intuition is grounded in something real. You just think that you have an explanation for why that intuition exists, right? That explanation being the empathy reciprocity thing. So we would both be agreeing, yeah, it does seem like human beings have an intuition not only towards morals, but towards the same moral concepts and towards the idea that those moral concepts actually mean something. But where we would disagree then is, okay, why does that intuition exist? I would say I think that it's something that is reflective of us bearing the image of God. And you would, as you've just explained here, believe that it would be something that has to do with empathy and reciprocity, right? So, and while I do want to get to that point, that initial point itself is, I think, a very strong point in favor of the Bible's claim that there is this idea of what you would call suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, right? Because essentially,
I don't see how.
So I guess I'd have to ask the question: where would be the disconnect from what I said so far?
Well, sort of the non sequitur is saying, well, because you have moral intuitions, then the Bible is true when it says that you've suppressed the unrighteousness or something is written on your heart. So what you haven't done is linked up that moral intuitions do in fact come from any external source other than your neurology, your physiology, your genealogy. You haven't made that connection, and I don't think it's strong evidence at all, because when you say that God's made us in his image, well, you'd have to say that the animals using their moral intuitions as well, you'd have to say that, hey, God's also done the same thing with them, which I think was one of my points earlier.
Well, so two quick points on that. The first one, so far, I would just flatly agree that I haven't made the connection yet, because so far I'm not actually attempting to defend the connection.
Okay,
right?
all right.
I'm simply just trying to say that when the Bible says the things which are suppressed are the idea that there is a creator and the idea that there is an objective morality, you would not agree with the phrasing of suppress because you don't believe it's true, right? But you would agree that those things appear to be intuitive, and also you don't agree with them, right? It seems intuitively true that objective morality exists. Also, that intuition is wrong. That would be a fair assessment of what Mark
Yes.
Reid believes. Am I correct?
Yeah,
in
yeah.
that?
Just like it would be intuitive to think that the Earth is flat, but I disagree that is actually true.
Right. So now we haven't yet made the connection, fair, but the Bible is, of course, not arguing for itself in that position. It's simply stating a truth to those who already believe it. If indeed it is true, you've already agreed that those are things which you have actually, again, you wouldn't use the terminology suppressed because you don't believe it, but which you have abandoned. Things which are natural to you, but which
What,
nevertheless you actually accept, or which is, of
what
course,
do you
what
mean
it,
abandoned? I don't get what you mean by that. I don't
well,
use
their
sort of
intuitions that you
intuition
reject.
as a well. I don't use intuition as a marker of things that I accept. Intuition is your sort of gut feelings about things. I wouldn't say that I've abandoned it. I'd say I try not to take intuition on board in the first place.
Yeah, to me, it kind of sounds like a little bit of the same thing, I guess. I'm not sure where the disagreement would be because what I'm saying there is that the intuition is something that you don't accept. You have something that seems to be innate to you, seems to be natural to you, and you have since rejected it. Since whenever the first time you had that intuition was, you have now rejected that intuition.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that I've had a intuition that morality is objective. I would say because the whole idea, because you don't have intuitions that morality is objective. You just have moral intuitions. You just have gut feelings that something is right or wrong. In order to say it's objective, you would have to go through a rational process of separating that which is objective from that which is subjective. And in order to do that, you'd have to access your higher cognitive process. So I think we're sort of talking past one another where you're saying, oh, you have an intuition that's objective. No, I just have moral intuitions. I just have gut feelings that this is right or this is wrong. In order to say it's objective, that's where you'd have to rationalize, well, it's not stance dependent. And that at that point, you're way past sort of, intuition.
Yeah, let me mention real quick. Just real quick, it would be hard to demonstrate that because all humans have some things in common. So even our subjective perspective all has some things in common. So even if all humans agree on something, that does not prove objectivity.
Correct.
Well, but let me just ask you, and that's not a bad point, by the way. But let me just ask very pointedly, and we'll take something extreme like a Holocaust. Do
Yes.
you have and to be clear, again, we're not yet grounding this in rational thought. I'm sticking with the realm of feeling and moving up to that, right? When you read about the Holocaust, is it and maybe you could even take this back to when you first read about the Holocaust, whenever that was, whatever point in your life that was, right?
Yeah.
Did you have a feeling that, we think this is wrong, or was your feeling this is just flatly wrong? Regardless, like if somebody else said it was right, they would be incorrect.
Well, it's just that it's wrong. I don't think I would encompass this is flatly wrong or add anything to it. I think that moral intuition would tell me that is horrendously wrong. I'm not sure if I would qualify it with any other. I'm not sure what flatly means. I think you're sort of trying to smuggle objective into there by saying flatly.
Well, I am, but the reason I'm trying to say, some word that is, in this case, flatly, that is not objective is because I'm recognizing, I'm conceding to you that the philosophies of objective morality take more rational thought than what we're currently discussing, which is your mere intuition.
Right. So an intuition, I don't think it sort of considers what other people's stances are. I think it is just a gut feeling in yourself, and you don't think about what other people are thinking. But does that in fact mean that you're thinking like, oh, this is objectively wrong? I don't think that that even is a part of intuitive thinking. I think it is just feelings. And what I'm saying is those feelings are based in empathy and reciprocity, i.e., if I was that person, I would be, it would be really wrong to me, right? That is the crux of empathy. We can place ourselves in other shoes. So when I hear about the Holocaust, it is horrifying, um, absolutely horrifying, because I can imagine my loved ones, or people I love, or myself, or my friends and family and things, like going through that. And I think that's sort of, I don't think you get to the point of deciding whether it is stance independent or stance dependent. I think you just, that's the empathy coming into play.
Well, so let me then, now don't worry, I'm Jewish myself, so I would never actually do this. But hypothetically, let's say I walked up to you and started defending the Holocaust. Less than 6 million, or it didn't really happen, or well, they're dirty banker Jews anyways.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've ever heard
stuff.
these guys.
No, I've run into those people.
Yeah,
Yep.
and I've dealt with my fair share of them, unfortunately. But hypothetically, let's say I was one of those guys, right? Do you think you would immediately rationally try to debunk that, or do you think you would have the sort of initial intuition, sorry, CJ, you're incorrect, and just flatly leaving it at that?
I
This is
think
wrong.
I
matter
think
what
I
you
would
think.
have the moral intuition that is morally wrong. Yes, like I concede that. Yes, I would certainly think that person is 100% wrong. Yeah.
So then, and I appreciate that. So my contention there would be that, and again, just to specify for the case of the audience, I'm perfectly confident that you're following, but for the sake of the audience, we are not yet grounding any of this in rationality.
Right.
But what that sounds like to me is, at least initially, at least in your initial intuition, you're taking the position without thinking it all the way through, without coming to philosophical
right.
conclusions, no
Yeah.
doubt, that the morality actually is stance independent, because a separate stance is coming in contrast to yours, and it's just almost like an immediate knee-jerk reaction. No, that's factually incorrect. It's just not true, right?
Well,
now, if you think about it further, you might not agree with that anymore. But at least that initial intuition is, no, CJ, that's not true. Holocaust is despicable.
Well, here's my question is,
yeah,
from Mark's perspective, is it really initial? Because Mark, you were saying that you think considering whether or not it's objective comes after rationality. So it's like this intuition that CJ is citing is actually an intuition that you would have after you've lived in rationality. So it's not pure intuition.
So for instance, if someone says, "Oh, I cut somebody's leg off," right? You might go, "Oh, what the?" And your moral intuition says that's really wrong. However, if they explained, "Hey, they had gangrene, it was the only way to save them," well, that's a different story, isn't it? Like, our moral intuitions cannot be relied upon to provide objective morality. They just can't be, because it is all relative to the situation. I'm a meta-ethical relativist, which means that I think that if, as long as the goal, we can agree on the goal, we can then make ideas about what's moral and what's not moral in virtue of that goal. But I don't see why me having an intuition that if you cut somebody's leg off, that's wrong, would be particularly accurate or useful, or whether I'm thinking objectively, how it gets you to some sort of moral objectivity. You can have an intuition that, hey, cutting people's legs off is wrong. That's objectively wrong, but that doesn't make it true.
Right. But again, I want to reiterate, I'm not arguing yet that it's true or grounded. I'm simply arguing that it's intuitive. And in so doing, trying to make the case that when the Bible is saying things like, this is the natural state of man, is that these things that like objective morality and design are true.
I don't
it's
think
not trying to put thoughts in your head. It's trying to say these intuitions are in fact true.
Well, I don't think it's true or not true. That's the thing. I don't think intuitions are objective or subjective necessarily. Like, I don't think you're thinking that far, because that guy, just say you're that quite frankly scumbag who thinks that the Holocaust didn't exist, and he goes up to a neo-Nazi and says the same thing: the Holocaust didn't exist. The neo-Nazi may have a completely different moral intuition. They might go, yeah, absolutely it didn't. Or a conspiracy theorist or one of these other people in the same circle. Their moral intuition may be completely and utterly different. So you can't show that somehow that moral instinct is pointing to something objective, because moral instincts vary depending on how we were raised, where we're coming from, all of these kind of things. They vary completely.
Well, one thing I think that would argue against that is, and I've, as I said earlier, I've had the, in a way it's unfortunate, in another way it's fortunate because you get to pick people's brain. But I've spoken with many people who would be classified as neo-Nazis even if they wouldn't call themselves that.
Yeah, rarely do.
Yeah, exactly, right? Because everybody knows the cat's out of the bag when you call yourself that, right?
Look, just as an aside, I've even seen people argue that sort of fascism is on the left, and it baffles me. It baffles me how they get to that point. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, and without getting into details as far as these conversations, it is very interesting because a lot of times I'll hide the fact that, and I say a lot of times, it's been probably 5 years since I've had one of these conversations.
Yeah,
but I would hide the fact that I am actually Jewish, and when I play the card, the air in the room just immediately changes. You know what I mean? Where it's like, with some people, it's like they get very aggressive about it, like, oh, like you just tricked me, and then with other people, it's like, oh, did I really just defend that to a Jewish guy? And it's just funny, Anyways, so with a lot of those guys, though, and this is anecdote, no doubt.
Yeah, sure.
But they'd be the first to tell you that this was not their initial belief. And in fact, with a lot of them, even the really bad ones, like I'm talking the hardcore caricatures that they draw on propaganda posters and all that kind of stuff, right? They don't actually buy the whole final solution idea until much later in the radicalization process. It usually starts with some level of denial, right? That it didn't actually happen, or it didn't happen to such a large extent as people say. And then over time, the radicalizing gets stronger and stronger and stronger. Now, if you were to talk to one of those people who's, your American History X guy, Edward Norton in American History X, if you've ever seen that movie.
Ages ago, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Good movie, if I remember. Yeah.
If you were to ask that guy at in that state, the questions of the Holocaust, would he have a different moral intuition? Certainly. But that's exactly what the Bible would refer to as suppressing the truth. In other words, he suppressed what is the baseline human intuition, or at least what seems to be the baseline human intuition, that kind of thing is wrong. And it took him a while. It took him, he had to go through the stages of denial. Okay, maybe it happened, but it wasn't as bad as people say. Okay, maybe it was kind of bad, but these guys were doing this, that, and the third, so that's why it was justified. And there's a whole, sometimes multi-year movement towards that reset, if you will, of his intuitions, which at that point, I almost wonder if you can even call it an intuition, because he's sort of trained himself, in a sense, whether he knows it or not, to suppress that initial human intuition, which you would chalk up to empathy, right? And all of that is only to say, not that there is any truth or lack thereof in the intuition, but that the intuition does in fact exist. We seem, as a species, it seems like cross-culturally, cross-generationally, in between genders, so on and so forth, that we have, at least at the start, at least when everything begins, a feeling that things appear to be designed and morals appear to be not only existing, but in some sense real. real in a more objective sense than subjective sense. Though again, I would freely admit that we're not thinking through the philosophy of that at that time. We're just doing,
Okay.
the knee check. Now, granted, like I said, that's antidote, and perhaps you would even be inclined to flatly reject the antidote. But I have a suspicion that you might not be, considering the fact that it's.
Well, I wouldn't outright reject it. I think that there's sort of some validity that intuitions can be changed based upon our core personal beliefs, what they call in psychology your core beliefs, basically. So our intuition seems to work on these things. So and I want to point out the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath. So a psychopath is neurologically based. They are born without a sense of empathy from the get-go. They just lack that part of their brain which produces empathy, which is fascinating and enlightening. Now, a sociopath is made, not born. They learn to switch that part of their brain off. So I think these intuitive things that what you've said of, hey, it can be a process where they learn this intuition, I would actually agree with you on that. I think that our intuitive responses can change depending on how we think about things, and like you mentioned, the sort of process of radicalization kind of there, which people don't take how they would if they weren't radicalized. They don't take the same moral intuitive process that they would if they didn't go through that process. But sort of saying, oh well, that shows that you're sort of suppressing the truth. You could make the same argument for flat Earth, saying, "Hey, because it's intuitively correct that the Earth is flat, you are just suppressing the truth." I just say the Bible. I know there's argument about it, but some people do claim the Bible says the Earth is flat. Someone could make the case, "Hey, you're suppressing the truth because intuitively it looks flat." Then you're suppressing that it is actually flat, and that is how we get to sort of flat earther movements saying that the Bible says that the Earth's flat. So I wouldn't A, trust intuitive things much at all, and B, I'm not saying that because someone doesn't trust their intuition and goes off and is indoctrinated into sort of some sort of neo-Nazi thing, that they will necessarily get to the truth. So what I'm talking about is which process is more reliable for getting you to the truth. Is it your intuitive reaction, or is it you sitting down and rationally examining the case for one thing over another? So I think that there's two major flaws there. That if you took it as true, everything that intuitively comes to you, you're going to make an incredible amount of mistakes, because as you've said, many things are counterintuitive. But it seems to me that you're hinging all of this on the Bible being true about what it says about suppressing the truth. And so I'd like to know why the Bible must be true about this statement, when you've said, hey, intuition isn't necessarily getting you to the truth. Why is this statement true?
Well, so as far as the why there, I think we may have, and in fact, what I was about to ask, and I will give a brief answer to the question, but what I was about to ask is if we can agree at the minimum that that the denial of objective morality appears to be a rejection of intuition, would you be willing to have a conversation as to essentially the groundings? In other words, empathy and reciprocity over and against my view of what is essentially divine command theory.
Well, I think the denial of objective morality isn't. I don't think intuitive gets to that point. I think that the denial of objective reality is something that I think that's downstream of moral intuitions. Moral intuitions are on an emotional level, on a reactive level. I don't think you could say that sort of because you feel a certain way about a certain situation that you're getting into subjective or objective at all. I would even argue that it's subjective, completely subjective, because you're not factoring what other people think into it at all. Like, you're not saying, hey, this feels wrong to me, but you're not going to, how does this feel to other people? Because as of then, you're passing aside from moral intuition and getting to evidence and rationality. Like, do other people think the same thing? So I don't think you're even getting to that point.
Yeah, and I think that would be why I think the conversation would have to happen the way in which I'm trying to go about it, is because it seems to me like we have two essential disagreements and one must come prior to the other, right? So the first disagreement is, I think that the idea that moral truths are in some sense objectively real is intuitive. It seems like, if I may, it does seem like at certain points, maybe it's at certain points of the actual logic and not just at certain points of this conversation, but it does seem like at certain points you agree with that and certain points you don't. And then after that, then there's, I think, a second question of, if it's true that we intuitively believe morals are in some sense objective. Now, I think that intuition is true. You think that intuition is false. Why? And that would be a double-ended question, why to both, right? And I think the answer there then would answer your question as far as, well, why do you think the Bible is correct in this instance, right? But you kind of see what I mean here, right? Like, so there's these two different questions I think the Bible is essentially posing for us. One of them, as far as the suppressing the truth, just for the sake of peace amongst us as interlocutors, I would say rejecting the intuition. But it doesn't sound like we can even get there necessarily.
Okay. I think that, like, so I could concede that certain people would definitely, like, would people generally consider or intuitively think that morals are objective? Maybe. Yeah, I think I can see where you're coming from on that. But I think that would be, I'm not sure that would be a sort of statement you could apply to all humans everywhere. Then again, it's so hard to make a rational declaration about the entailments of intuition, because they're not supposed to be analyzed. Yeah, so I don't know about that one. Look, I could say, hey, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that most people intuitively believe that morals are objective. But you sort of said that I don't think moral intuitions are true. I think that sort of that is breaking it down too much. I think some are true and some are not. But what I'm talking about is it reliable? Will it get you to the truth in a reliable fashion? That is what I'm arguing. That it's not a reliable way to access what is true and what is not true. Not that moral intuitions are not true or moral intuitions are true, because it's a case by case basis, right? You could believe your moral intuition on almost anything. You have a chance of being true, but I could flip a coin and call a heads, right? And is that reliable way of getting to the truth, just doing it at random in an arbitrary fashion? I would argue no. Like, being able to analyze, where the coin would land or something like that. There's a lot better way. But what I'm saying is that just because something is unreliable doesn't mean you won't be right about it. Right? You can have a moral intuition and be absolutely and utterly correct about that, but that doesn't mean that what the way you're doing it is reliable.
Yeah, I think one of the areas where we might be having a disconnect is, I don't actually disagree with that. My only contention, as far as the intuition is concerned, is to say that it is in fact intuitive. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. Which is why I think that if that was a point that we could agree on, then I think the secondary question of, does this in any way imply objective morality, or is objective morality wrong, or is objective morality grounded in a God, or those questions, it seems to me, can flow out of that initial question. But the only point I'm trying to get to in this conversation is just the point of is it the case, even generally, if we even want to try and soften it a little bit, that humans believe their moral intuitions to be factually true in an objective sense before they've rationally thought about it? In other words, do we have an intuition that when we think something is morally wrong, it's factually wrong, stance independent, even if we haven't philosophized to that point, right?
Yeah, but I want to bring this back to the original sort of question, and that's, if God wants us all to believe, then why has he failed to convince us otherwise? So part of your thing is sort of this idea that intuitively morals are objective. Okay, for the sake of argument, let's grant that. Let's just say, hey, I don't think you're getting to that point, but just say intuitively morals are objective, right? Just say it seems to be the case that morals are objective on an intuition-based thing. I don't understand how that gets you to God using intuition, which we know is not a reliable way to get you to the truth, instead of some other rational form of evidence. So I don't understand how that links in. So if CJ, maybe tie that in for me.
There's one thing I want to mention is that the reason it's not done by evidential proofs in that kind of way is because that's not spiritually transformative. So if Christianity is true, then coming to believe it transforms someone into a new creation. So then convincing people has to happen through a means that's transformative. So it must be spiritually convincing, which is why it's by the gospel and the cross and the compellingness of what is said about the cross. And that's spiritual compellingness, of course.
Well, that's not true for all believers that came to God, because according to the Bible, Paul had a evidential experience, as well as multiple other people have evidential experiences. So we know that God is able to, or according to an internal critique, God is able to provide these experiential or empirical proofs to people. The fact that he hasn't, it sort of shows that he has failed to demonstrate his own existence. And it's not up to me to sort of rely on unreliable means in which to demonstrate this entity's existence. I think that sort of any God would know that if you're saying, well, you've got to rely on your intuition, that's going to be insufficient to demonstrate your existence, because if we rely on our intuition, then the earth's flat, and light doesn't bend, and all of these things that are counterintuitive would be true.
Yeah, I appreciate your example of Paul. Paul was also a theologian, so there are moments when there are moments when facts are brought out of the way, and Paul would be an unusual example because that is pretty interesting that it was like finalized in that way. But the point is that Paul was still in a place where finding out that the person he was trying to persecute the followers of, the person he went to the cross, finding out that that person is the Messiah meant something in his context. So it did spiritually transform him. So if you're talking about some evidential way that also involves spiritual transformation, but the evidential stuff is also involved, then I can get behind that. But whatever it is, it would have to be spiritually transformative to make any sense with Christianity.
Okay,
Can I
so
also add to that, Mark?
let me ask two questions. Let me ask two questions first off, because I got to respond to that. Is
Well,
God
Well, hang on, Mark.
capable?
I just wanted to address something you said real quick, if that's okay.
Okay.
All right. You said that God wants to save everyone, but he's not doing that, so he's failed. Well, you're assuming that he says he's going to save everyone. In the Bible, God chooses to save those that believe. Okay, so he hasn't failed because he's chosen to save those that believe. So I just want to make sure you understand that. It's not God is emphatically declaring, I'm going to save every human ever. No, he's made it available for everyone, but he's only going to save those that believe. So God has not failed.
Well, I must have misspoke, because what I thought I said was that God wants everyone to believe. That was the original thing, that God wants people to believe. So if I want somebody to believe, I've got a ball in my hand, kind of thing. And then
No, I'm sorry. Didn't you say that God is failing because he's not saving everyone? I thought that's what you said.
Well, God wants everyone to believe, doesn't he?
Does God desires everyone should believe, but
Right,
he doesn't force it. But he's chosen to save those that believe.
Does he have the power to provide evidence to convince everybody?
Well, here's the thing. Evidence doesn't save anyone, Mark.
Well, but no, I'm not saying whether it saves or not. I'm just saying, does it, like, the evidence would convince people to believe, correct?
Not necessarily.
How else would someone believe in something?
Well, here's the thing, right? Like, I can show you evidence until the cows come home. I can show you fulfilled prophecies. I can show you mathematic impossibilities with all the fulfilled prophecies. I can show you historical evidence of the accuracy of the Bible. I can show you all those things, but you're choosing not to believe because you're suppressing the truth.
I don't think
for whatever reason there's something in your mind where you don't want this to be true. No matter how much evidence I ever present you, would never be enough to convince you of the truth. You don't want it.
Again, it's another case of you thinking you know my mind better than I do, which is ridiculous. And so what I'm trying to point out to you, Kevin, is every time you sort of say, hey, you know this and you think this and you are projecting what you believe onto what I know.
Okay,
hang on, no, Kevin, let me finish. Every time you're projecting what you think onto what I believe, you are destroying your own credibility, because I know what I know and I know what I think. So you can think I'm completely wrong. You can think I'm absolutely wrong. I don't believe and I'm wrong. A God does exist. I'm completely and utterly wrong. But you can't tell me what I think and what I believe. So every time you're saying that, you are destroying your own credibility with me, because I'm saying, well, Kevin obviously doesn't know what he's talking about, because he's saying what I know that I know is not true. So, that's the problem you've got. Every time you're telling me what I think and know, you are destroying your credibility, because you are wrong about that. 100% wrong.
You and I exist in the same universe. We have the same evidence.
I hope so.
We have the same Bible. We have the same history.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I have chosen to believe the truth, and God has revealed himself to me.
No, you haven't. You don't think that at all. You don't believe that at all. You know that there is no God. Do you see how insulting that is? Do you see how me telling you what you believe and what you know is just so insulting to somebody? To say, hey, Kevin, you don't actually believe at all. You're deluding yourself, kind of thing. That is insulting.
Sorry that the Bible offends you, but that is not my
it's
opinion.
Not the Bible. It's you.
It's
It's you telling me what I think and what I know that is offensive. Because I don't do the same to you. I don't say, hey, Kevin, you're delusional and you've convinced yourself of this and you're just making it up because you like to feel good about it. I don't say that, and I don't think that. I think you genuinely believe what you say. I give you that respect. And so what I want, like what happens is you don't give me the same respect. You say, hey, Mark, you actually believe. And I say, well, that's somebody I don't have to listen to, because they are clearly wrong.
Okay. So you're sassing me because I'm telling you what the Bible says. The Bible says that everyone knows God exists and some suppress the truth and unrighteousness because their deeds are evil. Now you're sassing me because you're accusing me of knowing your thoughts or something.
And that lowers the credibility of the Bible. This is the thing you've got to understand, is because if a book says that, the book is wrong, because I know what I think. So when you're talking about, oh, well, the Bible says this, I know the reality of the situation because they are my thoughts. And in order to have knowledge that you claim I do, I have to have belief. And I know for a fact, beyond a fact, that I do not believe in a God. In fact, I'll go one step further. I believe there is no God. Now, you can say I'm completely wrong. You can say I'm totally in error. But when you start to say, hey, no, that's not what you believe, you're just you're wrong. And the first thing I think is, well, that's somebody I don't have to listen to. They are so wrong on what I think.
Well, Mark, if there is no God, then what substantiates existence from your perspective? How can you trust your own reasoning processes?
Oh, you want to go down hard solipsism, do you? I'm more than happy to. I mean, I didn't know we'd get into presup today, but I'm more than happy to. Are you sure you want to go into?
I'm just
No,
saying.
no, no, Kevin. Kevin, I want to
fundamental?
ask you this one question. Are you sure you want to go into hard solipsism with me today?
Okay, like I don't know what that term means, but
Okay, so you're asking me how I justify things that I experience, see, my thoughts, everything in the universe, correct?
yeah.
Okay, so in all worldviews, presuppositions must be made. There's a distinct reason for this, and that is a fallibility. I don't know if you've ever heard of fallibility. It means that any justification, as Karl Popper would say, would go down to a Munchausen trilemma. All propositions basically come down to circular reasoning, infinite regress, or dogmatic assertion. And there's very, very specific reasons for this. Now, because of fallibility, we've got to make some presuppositions about the world. And hard solipsism is saying, hey, there is no justification for your senses or the world around you or any existence. So basically, it treats everything as not real. Everything is illusory because everybody's heard of this concept of hard solipsism. Like if you're in The Matrix, for instance, it's a beautiful movie because it outlines hard solipsism. If everything is just your senses are electrical impulses, how do you know you're not a brain in a vat? How do you know your senses are correct? How do you know that the universe around you actually exists as it is? The question is, we can't for sure. There is a lot of evidence from my senses that this universe is real, but I don't claim with absolute certainty, like 100% absolute certainty, anything really. But what I'm saying is, if I presuppose that my senses are real and that logic, the laws
Well, Mark,
of logic.
what you just said there, was that an absolute statement? Are you sure about that?
No. As I said, I don't have absolute certainty of everything.
Right, exactly. So then how can you know anything?
Yeah, so you're mistaking stuff like confidence, like a high. No, Kevin, stop. Let me talk. Let me talk. You're being absolutely obnoxious. I was having a good conversation.
Mark, you are projecting, sir.
Kevin,
come on, let me
trying
speak.
to like explain something real, and you didn't let him talk. He was just beginning to say what he was going to say.
But I was trying to point out something to him. He's making a mistake there.
Well, you don't know that because you didn't
hear what he was going to say.
I didn't say two words. You're mistaking a high level of confidence. Like if I have overwhelming confidence that my senses are true, right? I'm not saying I have absolute 100% certainty, but knowledge, when you're talking about knowledge, it's a very specific thing. It is justified true belief. If I have a high level of certainty and it's justified, then I'm claiming knowledge. Now, that claim of knowledge, let's put that there. That's a claim of knowledge that my senses are true. I have an incredibly high level of certainty, but I leave a little bit for hard solipsism to say, hey, I could be incorrect. If it is in fact true that claim of knowledge, that it is real, then that knowledge, I have actual knowledge. If it is true that this world is a incredibly convincing illusion around me, then I think I have that knowledge, but I do not in fact have that knowledge. The only way you could show I do not have that knowledge is to show that this world is a very permanent, convincing illusion. Do you think that this is a permanent, convincing illusion, Kevin? I'm not sure whether Kevin's muted for some reason or something.
Yeah, he's on mute. I don't know if he's trying to unmute.
I don't know. Well, I guess what I'm getting at is that even though we can't sort of go back and say, hey, I know that this isn't. So it's like simulation theory. Are we in a simulation? I can't prove with 100% certainty that that's the case. But if we can presuppose that this is the real world and we agree on that, then we don't have to. We then have an axiom of which to start. This whole idea that you have to have 100% absolute certainty to know anything, I'm not sure why that is. And sort of, so you'll say, are you 100% certain of that? No, but I have a very, very high confidence in that. And so you're taking it as a binary thing of 100% certainty or knowing nothing. And that just isn't how things work. You may say, hey, my God claim is justified because I have 100% certainty in it. Well, it doesn't make it true. Your level of certainty in something, or your claim of absolute knowledge, doesn't make it ontologically true. I could have 100%, 100% certainty in that the Earth is flat. It does not make that ontologically true. And he's gone. So yeah.
Well, we're listening though too, and I think there's something even more to the point. It's like, what if the reality is just that we can't know things for sure? Then the fact that we don't know things for sure is not like evidence against reality. That could just be the way reality is, you know?
Well, possibly, yeah. And I don't know if that problem can be solved. I don't know if anybody can be 100% certain. I meet people that claim 100% certainty about things. How do you then check that that's the case? If all knowledge comes back to the Munchausen trilemma, one of these three parts, then I don't know how you can confirm that to be the case. I don't know. It's definitely a problem that I've mulled over a lot. But I'm really sorry. I don't think a God solves it either.
I mean, for me, I would say that it does, but I mean, we could talk to each other. I could say 100% confidence rather than certainty, and then that would make sense to you. But if it's 100% confidence, then it makes sense that I would think it's certainty even if it's not.
Right. So how do we check that claim? And the whole idea
Well,
is,
Look to the cross.
well, I don't understand how that gets you to 100% certainty. I don't understand where that certainty comes from, because the cross could be an illusion as well.
Yeah, but I suppose it's because I find it more compelling than every other truth I'm aware of, and there's a lot of truths I'm aware of that are
Oh, that's
very
fine. Yeah.
compelling.
No, but would
And
you
it's
have?
also different because we have different worldviews, right? Like there's things that you believe that I think Satan was deceiving me of those things. And when I discovered that they're not true, I have more clarity. And so that's part of like why I would see some things as more persuasive than others. And I think we
Okay.
might have different standards of testing too. So that would be a
Well,
pretty deep discussion.
I really would sort of ask, is that absolute certainty? So absolute certainty is sort of no chance of there possibly being wrong, and even something that I would claim like a huge amount of certitude on, something that I have incredible amounts of confidence on, that my senses are describing something in the real world. I mean, we know they can be inaccurate, but for a certain level of accuracy, they're describing something in the real world. I certainly wouldn't claim absolute certainty for that. And I don't know how somebody could be absolutely certain when even their own thoughts could be wrong. Because I mean, I have thoughts all the time that are wrong. I think my wife's in the kitchen, she's not. My thoughts can be wrong. I don't know how you would sort of demonstrate that that 100% absolute certainty is in fact justified.
Yeah, I don't know if I can how the approach I would take to demonstrate that it's justified, you would probably not find credible.
Okay.
So it's like we have very different standards.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's because I have more confidence in Lord Jesus than I do in my own mind. And so I know I have to go through my mind to like perceive that. So this, from your perspective, it could be delusion, but I don't know if that helps make some sense of it. That like, yeah, I wouldn't trust my own mind this much to rely on my own mind, but I trust in Lord Jesus more than that.
Look, I really I avoid calling people delusional. What I was saying to Kevin was I understand that some atheists say that to some
No, I
theists, and
just mean if we got to the end of the line, then like that might be your best conclusion. So I'm not trying to frame it up like you'd be accusing me or something, but
well, no, I think that
just like I'm just trying to talk honestly about our disagreements. I feel like in the end, your
okay.
conclusion would be you would probably think the most likely thing must be that I'm delusional if we were able to get to the end of the road
No,
on all these things, I
no,
think.
no. Like delusion is a very specific thing. It's when your perception of the world doesn't align with what you think it is in your head. So, um, if like I might think you're wrong.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean already. Yeah.
Yeah, so
So
I might think you're a
that I
hundred.
used the wrong word then.
Yeah, no, it's just fine. I get what you're saying, and I might think that you're wrong, but I certainly wouldn't say that you're delusional as such, and I wouldn't say that you don't believe it or don't know it. I think that, I think that sort of saying that I would have to know what's going on in your mind, and I don't have access to your mind. Just like the other way around, you don't have access to my mind. So I certainly wouldn't say that. I may think that you're wrong, and like I said, I've been wrong about tons of things in my life. So, and
Well, going beyond that too, not just
yeah,
wrong, but that I'm using poor justifications as well,
yeah,
perhaps
I
would
think it
be.
would be
Yeah.
poorly justified, sure. But I mean, throughout my life, I've believed things that have been poorly justified. I've believed that, all minds are connected, so I can tell what other people are thinking, kind of thing, or at least what they're feeling. I used to consider myself sort of a mental empath when I was younger. I think that I was just using intuition to sort of pick up on body language and things. I think I was wrong about that, but I was convinced that at one point. So I wouldn't say you're delusional. I wouldn't say that was delusional. I think that I was just mistaken about, what I believed. And that happens to us throughout our lives. We believe something and we're mistaken. I certainly wouldn't denigrate you by sort of saying, "Hey, you're just delusional." No, and I'm interested in the reasons why you would think that is the case. But I think with belief, I wouldn't. People are entitled to their beliefs. When you're making a knowledge claim, I think there's more of a burden that you show your justification for that thing. I think with belief, you're entitled to belief. I don't think I wouldn't demand anybody change beliefs.
Well, I really appreciate that distinction between belief claims and knowledge claims. I think something that's relevant here is that because there's some agreement that I have with Kevin on what he was discussing with you, and so in First Corinthians chapters 1 through 3, I don't know if you're familiar with that section, but it's a good section for um, helping you comprehend how we see how our worldview relates to yours. So it talks a lot about like God making the wisdom of this world to be nothing and how God uses things that this world considers to be lowly, referring to people and stuff. So it kind of amounts to when you say we would lack credibility for thinking that we know your mind better than you, then in some sense, I would say that First Corinthians kind of says that we should lack credibility with the world. Like to be with the truth involves the world finding you not credible. And then Romans chapter 1, I would say, is insulting as well. As I wrote these notes down earlier, I wanted to mention this, but I think it will help kind of because I
Okay.
think the fact that I think Romans 1 is right about the core of humanity. And then I think that applies to me. And then it goes further into the book of Romans to the gospel, but then it applies to you and does not go further into the book of Romans to the gospel. So a lot of this is really at the core of like why the things that I would give as evidence to you, you just wouldn't find any value in them. And it would probably take some time getting to know each other for you to kind of like get your head around. I mean, or I don't know. If I maybe I just need to try to convey the beauty of the cross or something. That's really more what I find compelling. Like there's
Okay.
something about the message of the cross that in all the messages on earth it's clearly a message of righteousness, and then it doesn't come from a liar. And so there's sort of, this is what I mean by I find it compelling, spiritually compelling. I know
Well, I
I'm
mean,
speaking vaguely on it, but maybe I'm giving you a vague idea.
yeah, I guess I get what you're saying. I mean, I find it compelling if I were to win the lottery tomorrow, but that doesn't make it true. So I guess I'm not really interested in how compelling a message is, like how much it calls to me or how much it tugs on my heartstrings. I'm really interested in the factual claims that it makes and whether they are true or not true. Um, and so Corinthians 1:3, I did look it up because I do want to understand where you're
I was
coming
saying
from.
1 Corinthians 1 through 3.
Oh, okay, got you. All
So the
right,
3
so
chapters.
yeah, okay, gotcha.
Sorry.
So yeah, I think that um,
Well, there is a misunderstanding. When I say compelling, I don't mean emotionally. I do mean to someone's sincerity. Like for me, it was an overcoming of skepticism, but it's a deep thing. It's deep about how I see reality and how that relates to the core of truth and things like abstracts like morals and stuff, but also like what's gone on in history. And, so it's this very, there's a lot to it, but I definitely did mean sincere to someone's skepticism and compelling, but not
yeah.
according to observable evidence, but according to, we could say, reasoned evidences. But then it sort of goes deeper, and we would call it spiritual evidences.
Well, I did want to sort of clarify that I'm not saying that sort of like, because not all Christians will take this view that people are suppressing the truth of the unrighteous. I'm not sort of saying that the fact that the Bible says that. I think that it's that interpretation, and when I'm told that. So Nick, if you tell me what I think and what I know, then you lose credibility with me. I'm not really saying of the world in general, like you sort of submitted, because the world in general doesn't know my thoughts and what I know. It is with me that you lose credibility, and that may not mean anything to you, but if you say something that is demonstrably untrue, then you lose credibility with me. I'm not going to speak for the rest of the world, so I just want to clarify that small amount. It's just people telling me what I think, that I generally don't feel a need to really listen to them anymore, because they are obviously wrong about that significant point. Um,
And then I guess I would try to address it as what we believe about the core of humanity and how that affects our perception of you. So I would try to talk about it in a way where we'd have a chance for you to hear how our ideas relate to each other and we can have a discussion, but try to avoid just saying you think this, but it's like we believe this about the core of humanity and we believe it applies.
Yeah, and see that's where I think that that the churches are losing a lot of people, because they're sort of saying what people think, and if they're wrong about that, if that is wrong, then you're sort of again you're losing credibility with those people, because you're sort of saying, hey, this is what you believe and this is what you think, and people know what they believe and they know what they think, so that's sort of part of the problem that the church currently has. I think the churches that are losing people sort of have, among other things. And
Yeah,
so,
that kind of frames churches up as political entities, right? Like you want more people, and that's not really what it is to the four of us anyway.
well, no,
Yeah,
I
Well,
get
so
that. I
what
get
you're
that.
talking, yeah, isn't really a concern for us, but I do hear you.
Ironically, though, I would like to point out fundamentalist churches are actually, well, let me rephrase, conservative churches, because not all of them would agree with the label fundamentalist, are actually either in a stasis or growing. It tends to be mainline denominations that are shrinking. Do with that information what you will. I know what I do with it, but I think that, I don't know. To me, it seems like if you're basically just kind of a social club, then people will just go find a different social club. which is why I think a lot of people reject mainline churches?
Not really. I would call Ken Ham's church conservative, and I've been doing sort of a lot on Ken Ham recently, and he's been lamenting the exodus of people from the church kind of thing. He is rapidly diminishing numbers, and I certainly wouldn't call him a progressive church. He would be a conservative church.
I guess I was not particularly aware of that example. Just as a brief, and to be fair, that doesn't mean you're wrong, but just as a brief counterexample, though, I know that like the Moscow movement, you know, Doug Wilson and Jared Longshore and all them, is rapidly growing.
Well, they are the most publicized in their market, so
that's fair. That's definitely a fair point.
I would even use political terms for their church, and
yeah, I'm sure you'll always find exceptions to the rules, but I mean, I was reading a Pew Research study on if the current trends of religiosity keep up, then even by the most generous demographic process that America will be a secular nation, or, you know, population-wise secular, not just government, by 2070, that Christians will be the minority.
Well, that I would certainly agree with. In fact, the evangelical label only is, according to Pew Research from 2020, only accurately describes 13% of Americans even today. Now, that doesn't mean the Christian label. The Christian label is, I think, 68%, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's right there, yeah.
Yeah. But evangelical is typically kind of, because, you know, fundamentalist is like it's a bad word these days. So basically, you take your Reformed Baptists and your traditional Presbyterians and your Southern Baptists, and those guys would all make up the 13%. And then your more mainline denominations like Methodists and more mainstream Baptists, you know, Anglicans, so on, they would make up that additional 55%.
Yeah, and
I
look,
think
some people would consider Rome, right? Because I mean, Romanism has grown hugely over the decades, relative to at least its percentage.
Do you mean Catholicism?
Well, Catholic means the one universal church,
Yeah.
And they're not actually a church; they're a sect separated apart. They cut themselves off at the Council of Trent. They declared that anyone who believes the gospel is cursed, and they cut themselves off from the church. So I don't call them Catholic, because that's like a propaganda term that means the one universal church. So I call them Rome. And then anyone who's considers themselves, quote, Catholic, you know, a Rome, but they actually believe the gospel, then according to Rome's official stances, they would be cursed out of Rome. So I don't know if I would really call that person a Romanist at that point.
Well, I look, I'm not getting into a political discussion about, you know, the true church or whatever. I mean, I don't have a dog in the race, quite frankly. I don't.
Oh yeah, that's fine. My main point was just that I think their numbers are super relevant to what you two were talking about.
Yeah, I know that the Catholic Church is diminishing, but I think that has more to do with the outrageous sort of preponderance of hiding criminals in their organizations than to do with any kind of sort of spiritual thing. I think that there's been problems. Anyway, I really don't want to get into a political fight about, you know, what's the true church or how they're using it. I just call them Catholics because that's what they call themselves. It can be false if you want. I don't care. I don't believe any church actually has any kind of right over another. I think that the claims are generally all on par. I think that some religions are more dangerous than others. I would have a higher level of confidence that some churches are wrong, like Scientology and Mormonism, for instance, are you know, absolutely and utterly incorrect. They're man-made without a shadow of a doubt. But I still have a higher level of confidence that a God doesn't exist. But I think that all we have to do, as far as, and to sort of draw it back to what you were saying, CJ, I think that I don't require you to believe in the same morals that I do. I don't require you to believe the same things that I do. I think that most of Christianity is morally compatible with the rest of society. So talking about, like, in my country, in Australia, I think that most Christians would agree with an atheist on most of the things within society, kind of thing. I don't see a reason why it wouldn't. And I guess what I want to get across to you is that, as a humanist, I think that all you'd have to do to change my mind on a moral situation would be to sort of convince me or demonstrate to me that something is bad for people, essentially. Now, I might disagree with you on that, but that's what you would have to do to convince me. That to change morality, you don't have to believe in a god. And I sort of highly push back against the idea that you need a god to have morality, or even that you need objective morality to have morality. I don't think it's required.
Yeah, and I think that would be a topic I'd like to address with you at some time.
Okay.
I don't want to get too deep into it now, only because we are hitting the 2.5 hour mark.
Oh,
and while
really?
I'm not
Oh, all right.
trying to cut this down at this moment. I do want to, like, it's one of those topics I would like to go another 2 hours
Oh,
with you
well,
on, which
yeah.
actually, really quick before I forget. First, let me figure out. I have specially designated days for out of house conversations. Are you
Oh,
available on? Oh shoot, your Monday is not my Monday.
yeah, no, just give it to me in Eastern time and I'll work out the rest. I put my email address in the private chat too, if you want it, CJ, because I did have a look for your email address so I could contact you, but you didn't have anything. And I don't do social media very much. So I don't Facebook and I don't do any of that stuff. I largely ignore it for personal. I just don't enjoy that kind of sort of back and forth. And I don't do anything really. I don't do Instagram. I don't do Twitter or anything. I'm to be honest with you, those things just confuse and annoy me. So I don't generally do them. But if you do need to contact me, my email address is there. Because I noticed you didn't have one up. I did try to contact you.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna just email you a quick hi right now.
Yeah, sure.
Made contact.
Fantastic, thank you.
But
But
here's
yeah,
something that's funny is it never occurred to me before, Mark, that you're not just an American who speaks like kind of well and proper or something. I guess most Australians don't speak the way you do exactly, huh? So
well, I'm from Western Australia, which we have a different accent. So if you go and look at who's from Western Australia, Heath Ledger was from Western Australia. So if you see his natural talking
that makes
accent,
sense.
yeah, it is like mine kind of thing. It's not something that I try to sort of change or anything. It's just the way that I speak. And he speaks with a kind of, you can hear the inflection, but it's sort of, Western Australia is very separated from the rest of Australia. So our accents are kind of completely different. And my background is I've worked a lot in internet, telecommunications, call center work, just a whole bunch of stuff, talking with people. So because like a lot of people were international or sort of have different accents or different understandings, I've learnt over that many years how to make myself clear to just about anybody, to enunciate, to pronounce things correctly, just that sort of precision with communication. That's something that I've just learnt over time. So people can understand me, and I can generally, I'm pretty good at picking up on people with accents due to that, because I've had to.
You know what's funny? I've always wondered why it is that sometimes certain Australian people like Steve Irwin or Graham Gould, if you're familiar with him here in the YouTube sphere,
Yeah.
I can point it out immediately. And then there's other Australians where I'll sit there and I'm like, are they British?
Yeah.
I don't really know, and now you've just explained. Now I know why.
Yeah.
So, cool.
And there's different accents within Australia as well. I mean, there's sort of just your average level Australian kind of thing. Then you get really ochre stuff, which I guess it would be an Australian version of ghetto talk kind of thing. and they have the real twangy kind of accents kind of thing. They're like, yeah, mate, kind of thing. You know, they
Right.
chew rocks when they talk. And I mean, I can put on that
Yeah.
accent, but it's not my natural accent. You know, it's not how I talk at home or whatever. You know, I can say, hey, mate, how you doing, kind of thing, that kind of stuff. But it certainly isn't how I would speak, you know, to my wife at home or something like that.
And also, it's because Australia is large, like the United States
Yeah.
is, so you have regions to have accents. Whereas, like in Europe, every small area you go new is named a different country. So
Yeah, that's
it's a
right.
whole
Well, you know,
kind of
though, interestingly, Nick, there's like 9 different distinct English accents,
Yes.
and if you hear them side by side, it's actually like really obvious. Like
Yeah.
like
yeah,
London.
that is true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you hear Scouser, for instance, people from Liverpool, they have a really distinct accent, and that differs from, say, you know, sort of Wessex, which is sort of the very posh English accent. They're very different, and it's kind of, you know, it doesn't even. So I guess I agree with CJ. It doesn't even require a big country. I think it just requires a stratified country. And I mean, Americans have
Yeah,
very
because
distinct
then you go to the
accents as
rest of
well.
Britain,
Yeah.
and you go to the rest of Britain too. You know, that would be considered a different ethnos, a different like
Yeah.
people group to some extent with the Irish and the Scottish, but really it's the same area of land, it's the same country
Yeah.
in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, yeah, 2.5 hours. That went by fast. I'm going to take off, but thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it. It was an interesting conversation, if nothing else. And yeah, good to see you all. Thanks, CJ. Hit me up if you do want to talk again. No problem. Keep it in Eastern States. I'm used to working out the time from there. Like, it's my fault for being upside down. Basically, I will work out the times. It actually
Or
works
being
out.
somewhere that doesn't exist.
Yeah, somewhere does. Yeah, koalas are fake and all that stuff. Yeah. So, the thing is, it's a 12-hour difference. So if you're looking at 9 at night, it's like 9 in the next morning for me, kind of thing. So it's not too bad, but still, I get confused occasionally. So just say it in Eastern time, and I'll work out the rest because I'm used to doing it like that. But I want to thank you, CJ, and thanks, Nick, for talking to me. Thanks, Kevin, and yeah, good to see you, Nanya. Even though you've been pretty quiet, it was good to see you, mate. I haven't seen Nanya Biz since last I was on Amy's channel, I think, ages ago. So it's good to see you, mate.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Good memory. Good memory.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's definitely a pleasure now that I'm better behaved than I was a couple of years ago.
Oh, no worries at all, mate. Like it's fine. You know, I you know, look, I when I was younger, I used to have a fantastically enraged temper. Like I would get angry all the time, and I had to work on it. I had to you know, sort of change my paradigm about things, and it's hard. It is hard. So I understand that, and people get passionate about stuff, and I love it when people are passionate. I do. So like I understand. Hey, everybody flies off the handle occasionally. It's not a problem at all. It's fine. No problem. But take care, everybody. Yeah, and have a good night or day or whatever it is, wherever you are.
Absolutely, and thank you very much. And I'll I did send you a little just hello, but
Oh
that's just
yeah.
for contact.
No, I tell you what, I'll send
back
something
to you.
back just so you know that I've got it. Or not? What address did I put up? Did I put in the wrong address? Is this what happened? Where are we?
Sometimes it takes a minute.
Yeah.
Probably especially all the way to Australia.
So the email I got was Vector Slide.
Yep.
Does that sound accurate?
Yep. At gmail.com.
But out loud in the live stream, I don't know if that was intended.
No, it's on my website anyway. On my YouTube channel
Okay.
anyway. It's not a problem. You know, it's fine. No, I haven't got it yet. Maybe I should. Oh God, it went to my spam folder. Hold on, let me just. Yeah, no, it's interesting how the sort of auto spam stuff works. So, if you're the mail server you're using for your ISP is pinged for spam violations too much, often you'll end up in spam folders, which is why we sort of say check the spam folder. But yours coming from Gmail. Interesting. Yeah, okay, so I just sent hello back. No worries at all. But take care, everybody. I'm going to take off. But yeah, thanks so much for talking to me, and have a good one. See you.
Blessings, bro.
Pleasure, man. You have a good time as well.
Thank you for watching, liking, and subscribing this video. And I want to give a big thank you to all the channel members whose support allows me to bring you more content like this in the future. Thank you so much, everyone.